So tonight it's my great pleasure to welcome Stuart Fitch here to give his talk. So Stuart Fitch is the Director of Flight Operations for one of the world's largest and longest established humanitarian air transport providers, Mission Aviation Fellowship. He first flew solo on his 17th birthday courtesy of RAF Flying Scholarship. After 13 years flying the RAF, predominantly on the E3D Sentry and working as a qualified flying instructor in 2003, he joined the MAF. He spent 8 years in Africa flying, instructing and managing flight operations on the Cessna C208 Caravan in countries including South Sudan, Kenya, Madagascar, Liberia, Mozambique, South Africa and Somalia. He's currently working on operational headquarters at MAF in the UK since 2011 and is currently the Director of Flight Operations for their operations based in 12 countries across Africa and Asia Pacific. And with that, I'll hand over to Stuart.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll try and talk to people in the room, but I'm conscious that there's people also online who are watching this. Phil Taylor is someone that I've known for a number of years now and who I've worked with closely over the past few years. He asked me to come and do a presentation, so I will try and keep to time. If you want me to move on quickly, then you just have to encourage me to move on because I get quite passionate about this as a subject. So I will spend hopefully the next sort of 40 minutes or so talking about the work of MAF, the work that we do, the different places that we work, which is probably something that's going to be unusual and something I hope you find interesting and opens up a different sphere of aviation to you that you've not really come across before. As we've just introduction said, I've been flying all my life. This is actually the 152 that I flew solo in. I managed to dig out a picture of it this morning. Golf Bravo Golf November Tango 152, which I first flew solo in on my 17th birthday. So I'm proudly say I could fly solo before I could drive solo. I joined the Air Force in 1990, straight from school, learned to fly on jet provosts. And then was a multi-engine pilot, so learned to fly, got my wings flying the jet stream, and then spent 2 tours flying the E3D Sentry. I did a co-pilot's tour, then interspersed with a tour as a flight instructor back on the jet stream again, and then went back and did a command tour on the E3. Was involved in operations in the Balkans and in Afghanistan, and proudly members of 23, 8 and 45 Squadron. So in 2003, I left the Air Force and with my young family we moved to Kenya, where I started flying for Mission Aviation Fellowship. I went straight onto the Caravan, a lot of IFR experience and instructional experience. So I was on the Caravan, so I had never really flown piston engine aeroplanes, but this is in South Sudan. And yes, we were flying under the UN banner because at the time South Sudan as it was, well, Sudan as it was then, it's now South Sudan, was a war zone. And the only way that we could actually fly in there and fly with our humanitarian partners was under the UN. So we flew with UN call signs. I flew in some pretty amazing places. I'll show you some more pictures later on. And very, very different from the flying I was doing in the military. This was trying to organise some repatriation flights for people from a medical centre. They'd just been treated for a disease called kwashiorkor, and we arrived and we were told that we had about 40 patients to fly back to where they'd come from. And we got there and there was 200 people on the side of the airstrip. And you don't know their names, you don't know who they are, you just have a list of names of 40 people. Fortunately, the American doctor who was behind us, an incredible woman, was able to help us, but each load of about 13 passengers would take about an hour to sort them out, and then you have to go back and do it all again, and it's 40 degrees of heat outside. It's quite an experience, hence my slightly hassled look on my face. After 3.5 years of flying in Kenya and South Sudan, we moved to South Africa, where I was the program manager there, the country director, and we set up a flight training school. As I mentioned, I've been a flight instructor as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about the flight training that we do later on. So Mission Aviation Fellowship, as I mentioned, is a humanitarian faith-based charity. We are a Christian charity, and our purpose is to bring help, hope and healing through aviation. And we do that in many different parts of the world. It's a charity that started in 1948. 3 gentlemen after the end of the Second World War who'd been involved in aviation, either as pilots or engineers, decided that they could do something better with aviation airplanes than destruction and war. And they raised enough money to buy a Miles Gemini and decided that they would do a safari down into East Africa to try and find where the best place they could start an aviation service in remote parts of Africa. So as I said, they bought a Miles Gemini and they set off from Croydon Aerodrome. Unfortunately, they got as far as Burundi and this happened. They got caught in a downdraft in a valley and crashed the aeroplane. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but that wasn't a particularly auspicious start. Fortunately, we do much better than that now. And the next aeroplane they bought, does anybody know what this one is? It's a Dragon Rapide, yes. So they ended up with a couple of these and then moved onto metal aeroplanes with the Cessna 180 series. And this, I've put this in, this is a much younger version of me, but the gentleman there is Stuart King, who was one of our founders. He sadly died last year at the grand age of 98. And up until literally the last 6 months of his life, he was as sharp as a tack. It was a real privilege. I had the privilege of flying him up into South Sudan. And even to the day he died, he was still involved with the organization and knew who was going on. And fortunately, we share the same first name. So, but he would always ask me how my wife was and what the kids were doing. Amazing man. So I mean, we've been around for more than 70 years now as an organization, and very much we're still dealing with the same things. We have issues with local, there's transport challenges that we're helping people to overcome with difficulties in roads. We still try and reach isolated people no matter where they live in the world. We also, everywhere we go, we always seem to attract a crowd. The number of places that I've been to, you're flying in the middle of nowhere, you land and the airplane is surrounded by people, whether it's kids, whether it's grown-ups, no matter who it is. Something you have to get used to when you're flying in some of the places that we fly is you get a lot of armed people around. The one at the bottom was some refueling that I did in Somalia, and the guys just walk up with AK-47s and you just have to kind of get used to it and smile and carry on. We've landed some pretty challenging airstrips. I'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later on when I talk about how do you manage a commercial flight operation in some of the places that we fly. But the challenges remain the same. Some of the places we fly, it gets a bit wet and the airstrips are pretty challenging, and sometimes the pilots have to carry and have to dig airplanes out. All of our pilots in the pod underneath the aeroplane will always carry a spade, because there's many places where you have to dig aeroplanes out of the mud. We build our own hangars everywhere that we fly. We have our own maintenance teams. We've been building hangars for years. The one at the bottom is the latest, the newest one we built is in Liberia. I was fortunate enough to be running the project to build that one, somewhere in the region of $1.2 million that was donated by some donors here in the UK who helped us to build that as we are launching out into West Africa. And again, something I'll talk a little bit more about shortly. We fix our own aeroplanes. We have teams of engineers in all of our programs. So any budding engineers, if you fancy a challenge, then please come and talk to me, because we're always looking for engineers who can come and work with us and help us fix our aeroplanes. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on is that we are flexible in the way that we operate our aeroplanes, and that we will work wherever people need us to, and we will use aircraft to reach people no matter where they are, whether it's on the ground, whether it's on water. So we've got amphibious aeroplanes, which I'll talk a little bit more about as we go on. So as an aviation organization, from the first countries that we worked in the late 1940s, we had our American friends started in Mexico and we started in Sudan. From there, we've now expanded into a global operation that works in more than 35 countries around the world. So the countries that you see coloured in here are where we've actually got permanent bases, and from there we work into many other countries. So for example, our Kenya operation, I've flown many times into Somalia. And from South Africa, which is where we used to have a base in South Africa, I've flown all over Southern Africa into Angola, Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique. And our two newest countries are Guinea in West Africa, which the aeroplane just arrived this week, and we've just got our permissions from the government, and we're hoping to start on the 1st of April. And sadly, Myanmar. I say sadly because we had almost got to the point where we got an air operator certificate there, and then are we now the 1st of February? Yeah, so a year ago today, the coup happened, and we had to completely stop. So we'd spent almost £2 million building an airstrip up in a place called the Chin State up in the north of the country, and we just had to stop the whole thing. So we're really hoping that at some point we'll be able to get back into Myanmar, because sadly, as you know, things are getting worse in the country at the moment, not getting better. The work that we do as an organisation is we are there to support humanitarian, faith-based, medical organisations. We don't do any of that work ourselves. We are there as a service provider and a transport provider for all of the organisations that are working to reach out to the people that are the most isolated and the most needy around the world. And we have the incredible privilege of working with more than 2,000 organisations. And this is just a very small sample of them, some of whom you will recognise, doing all sorts of different work across the whole spectrum of humanitarian relief and development work across the world. We will work with them, providing a service whatever they need. Sometimes it's logistics, sometimes it's transport, sometimes we will work specifically with them. And I'm going to talk about an example later on where we partner with donors in the UK to heavily subsidise flights that enable a particular piece of work to be happening in a remote part of a country. And in this instance, the one I'll talk to you about is in Chad. We are also heavily involved in disaster relief and disaster response work. We've got an arm predominantly based from the US, and their sole job is to work in disaster relief areas. I've been involved in some of them in East Africa, particularly sort of around the famines that we've had in East Africa, some of the aftermath of big locust infestations, that sort of thing. We were heavily involved in the post-tsunami from 2004, was it? I'm trying to remember when the big tsunami was in Asia, and that actually led to us being able to set up an aviation operation in Aceh in Indonesia, which previously we would never been able to do, and we were there for about 10 years. Also heavily involved in the Nepalese earthquake, partnering with a local helicopter operator to reach out to isolated parts of the country, and really being able to use and pioneer being able to use aviation to reach out and be a real centre point for relief and development and humanitarian response. Something that's very close to my heart. That's what I wrote my master's dissertation on. So we also have a fleet of 138 aircraft. It's just growing, actually. We've just bought a couple more. Predominantly, we use small aircraft. We did have some Twin Otters, which we've just sold, but we're using aircraft that are robust, mainly general aviation aircraft, because they're simple to maintain and they're reliable and robust. So Cessna Caravans. This is also a caravan on floats. We've got two of these amphibious ones based in Bangladesh. Cessna 182s, these are the babies. Phil's just been working on a project with us to review the place of this aircraft in our fleet. They've got diesel engines in them, so they use Jet A1 fuel, and they've got a niche role for us, but many of our partners really like them because we can operate them incredibly cheaply, and for many of our partners, it's as cheap to charter and fly one of these as it is to drive a Land Cruiser for a whole or 2 or 3 days across some really rugged terrain. So they don't take many people, but we've got 5 of those. The GA8 Airvan, we use those in Australia and Timor-Leste. The 206, it's our old faithful workhorse. We don't have many of these left now because they're all getting rather long in the tooth, but we've still got a couple in Tanzania and one in Uganda. And the newest aircraft in our fleet, our American cousins use a number of these now, the Quest Kodiak, and they also now have them on floats as well, amphibious ones. And they also have a PC-12. This was our PC-12. We used it in Kenya, in South Sudan, and they bought it off us, and they now use it in DRC, in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. So that's the fleet of aircraft we use, 138 of them around the world. All of them are flown to commercial standards. All of our flying is done commercially, so somebody somewhere has to pay for what we do. So we have a sliding scale of fares that we charge to our customers, whether that be the UN, which will do a full commercial rate, and if we're flying for a small charity, for example, we'll heavily subsidise those flights. And like I said, I'll talk to those a little bit more about that in a minute. One of the sort of, I think I can say this, that we fly to more destinations than any other aircraft operator or any other airline in the world. I'm going to quote some 2019 figures because that's the last sort of really sort of the last year that is representative of what we really do. 2020 and 2021, we had a significant reduction in the amount of flying that we're doing for obvious reasons. But in 2019, we flew to more than 14,000 different destinations. And I will show you just a few examples of the kind of places that we fly to. This is an airstrip in Indonesia, not the normal airstrip, and this isn't some of the most challenging ones either. But just to give you an idea, we in that year we flew over 7 million kilometers. That was 52,000 flight legs, and this has actually gone down. It used to be that on average, one of our aircraft took off and landed every 3 minutes throughout the year. In 2019, the hours were a bit lower, so on average, every 5 minutes, one of our aircraft takes off and lands. And most people have never heard of us, and yet we're doing that amount of flying. We flew just almost 40,000 hours total, 150,000 passengers, and 5 million kilograms of freight in 2019. And all in small aeroplanes. So I'm just going to show you a few pictures of some of the different types of airstrips that we fly to. I think this one is in Chad, landing on desert airstrips, or in Mongolia, we would get license provision from the Civil Aviation Authority there to land on temporary snow airstrips. So we're operating the aircraft completely across the envelope from the coldest to the warmest temperatures possible. This is an airstrip in South Sudan, which and it's there. That's one. The name of it will come to me. I've landed there a number of times for one of our partners, Tier Fund. This is one of the more extreme ones. This one is now closed, but this was one of our ones in Indonesia, and I showed this to one of my lecturers when I was doing my master's course, and he now uses this as an illustration of how do you risk assess airstrips. And this one's a good one. Needless to say, you take off downhill and you land uphill. I'm going to show you a video now of this. This is a video that I took of an airstrip in South Sudan, a place called Lankien, which is where I've landed many times. This is just an illustration of some of the challenges that we face as an organisation and some of the challenges that our pilots face. And just to give you an idea of some of the challenges that we face when you're trying to operate to commercial standards and maintain your quality and safety standards, operating in a very unstructured and unregulated environment. So this is an airstrip called Lankien. It's typically about 1,200 meters long. And it's made up of something called black cotton soil, which is very, very soft when it gets wet. So the day before, I'd been told that another air operator had landed at this airstrip. And when we called up our partners in the morning, we always do that to say, particularly during the rainy season, which this is, and they said, yeah, it rained a little bit overnight, but don't worry, there's still enough, it's still landable. And someone came in yesterday and landed. So I don't know how well it's going to show in the room, but hopefully online you can see this. Just have a look and see what some of the challenges are associated with this particular airstrip. I'm just going to jump forward a little bit. So that was the conditions. It's ISA plus 23, 1,500 feet above mean sea level, and yeah. So this was just taken with a GoPro inside the aeroplane. What we do is, whenever we go into an airstrip at double altitude, for a while we will always inspect the airstrip, so we don't take it for granted. And we'll fly, our pilots are trained, we'll fly through the airstrip, prepare for landing, and you fly through at 5 feet. So you level off at 5 feet, you're flying along, and it gives you a really good idea of the condition of the airstrip. I don't know how well that came out. Resolution's not great here in the room, but I flew through, and I don't know whether you noticed some of the obstructions that were on there. There's an awful lot of water. I mean, it's pretty much flooded. It was like a mud bath. I reckon there was about 200 meters on that airstrip that was landable, so I didn't land there. But it took me an hour and a half to fly there, and the customer had said, "Yep, it's good. You can come in and land." And I had an airplane full of people and full of freight, which was supposed to land there. So I had to turn around and fly all the way back again. So that was 3 hours of wasted flying. What you probably didn't see on the air, if I'd have shown you again and I got you to look out for it, there were also cows on the airstrip, there were goats on the airstrip, there were children running across the airstrip, and there was a guy driving his motorbike down the edge of the airstrip as well. That's normal. So what we tend to do, and I've come into airstrips, I haven't landed on them, but I've been to airstrips where I arrived and people have put goalposts up at either end of the airstrip because it's the only bit of open land and they were playing football. I've also landed in the military, have been using airstrips as shooting ranges. I've landed on airstrips that are uphill, and if you get over the crest, the guy's coming towards you in a Land Cruiser, because again, it's the only open bit of land that there is around. There's real challenges with these kind of airstrips. We've had guys had to abort takeoffs for goats running across the airstrip, children running across the airstrip, cows running across the airstrip. You name it. It's quite a significant challenge for our guys. So the question is, how can you operate in that kind of environment? I don't want to show you that to you again. How can you operate safely in that kind of environment when you're being told one thing by the customers, another operator has landed there the day before? We invest a lot of money in our training of our pilots. We do a lot of work with in the assessment phase before pilots join us, but also we put them through probably at least 6 months of training that's specific to the kind of work that we do, both generically before they move to the country that they're working in, and then they do a phased process of being released to solo operations. Phil has done a lot of work with us on the quality and safety side of things. We have our Director of Quality and Safety, a guy called Jeff Hillier, works very closely with all the programs. As with all commercial operators around the world, we have our own quality and safety systems. We have to write our own standards, and to a large degree, we're also our own regulators, and we have to set our own standards, because many of the places in which we're operating, the rules don't really stretch to the kind of flying that we're doing, and many of the other operators, unfortunately, in the areas that we're operating, don't always abide by the rules. So we have to be really robust internally in auditing ourselves internally to make sure that our documentation is in place, our standards are set robustly. So part of my job is part of the team that I run. We're responsible for setting our own standards, implementing our own standards. So for example, we've just completely overhauled our airstrip standards. We had a couple of accidents a few years ago, and part of that was associated with not being robust enough about looking after the airstrips, as you just seen an example of. So our safety teams, we're heavily invested in just culture, making sure that we are really trying to get to the bottom of everything that leads to incidents and accidents as we have them. We are fortunate that we've invested a lot lately in trying to really up our safety reporting levels, and I'm really proud of some of the reporting culture that we now have. And security is a big thing for us. Many of the countries in which we work, security issues are a real challenge for us. Aviation security and contingency response. You know, we're operating in very remote parts of the world. And I'll show you one of the systems that we have for monitoring our crews. So we have a whole team dedicated to these things. So as I mentioned, we are commercial operators, so we have to work with the regulators in the countries where we work. And these are just some samples of all the different regulators with whom we have to work. So we have air operator certificates in all bar 2 or 3 countries where we work. So for example, South Sudan, Liberia and Guinea, the aviation authorities there aren't mature enough yet to issue us with an air operator certificate or to provide airworthiness inspections for us. So we host our operations under AOCs from other countries. And that brings in extra challenges. We're just starting up our operation in Guinea, and we're looking to host that under an FAA AOC that our American colleagues are providing for us. But you still have to work with the Ghanaian aviation authorities as well. And they all have the different requirements, even though we try and model on ICAO. They've all got their own idiosyncrasies that we have to accommodate. We have somewhere in the region of 150 pilots around the world, all of whom are trained, all of whom are standardized, all of whom are checked to our own standards internally every year. This is the team in Papua New Guinea. And we are very selective. I would think of all the pilots that apply to us, we probably reject 30 to 40% of applicants because of, I mean, you've seen some of the places that we are flying. The requirements we have of our pilots are very high. We do some of our own ab initio training. We have a flight training school in Australia that a couple of my team members look after, providing ab initio training specifically for the type of flying we do. So they use the same checklist flows, the same airstrip inspection philosophies taught to our guys right from day one. This is our chief flying instructor there, Andy Little, doing a basic, it looks like he's doing some piston engine theory, which was never my favorite subject, with some of the students there. And we also partner with another flight school in the Netherlands as well. We also invest, as I mentioned, we invest a lot into the flight training of our pilots. Once they join us, we have a flight training center set up in Uganda. This is there, training our guys to fly the Caravan, but also then training them to operate the Caravan. The flying of the airplane is actually the easy bit. It's the operating and using that tool to do what we want it to do is the challenging part. I always say that even though I've flown in war zones in the military, the flying is the easy bit for us. It's the stuff on the ground that's the challenge when you're having to deal with all the local authorities and so on and so forth. And we've had a number of ex-military guys flying for us. And some of the flying I've done in South Sudan is amongst the most challenging flying I've ever done, because you're flying single engine, single pilot, IFR, in a very highly unregulated environment. I've shown you this photo. The last couple of years have been a big challenge for us from a training perspective. We're fortunate enough in Uganda that we have a simulator there that we can connect to virtually. So this is one of our pilots, Ida, who's Dutch, and his instructor, Hans-Jorg, up in the top right-hand corner, was sitting in his basement office in Switzerland, running the flight training scenario in the simulator in Uganda. And this was Ida just at the end of it, showing how much he'd enjoyed the training experience. So we've had to be really imaginative in the way that, and creative in the way that we train and work with our guys. These guys here are our saviors. These are the engineers. We have teams of engineers in every single program that we fly in, predominantly because most of the countries where we operate, there are no other aviation maintenance organizations. So we do our own airworthiness, we do our own maintenance control, and we have our own licensed engineers. These are the guys in Northern Australia in our operation up there. And these guys have to be incredibly proactive. They're working in hot, challenging environments, and sometimes they have to be really creative in the way that they maintain the airplanes. This is doing a wheel change on a 206 somewhere. That's 5X, so that's somewhere in up country in Uganda somewhere. They've obviously got a thorn in a tire or something, and they had to do a wheel change. So you have to put everything onto another airplane and go out and rescue, doing stuff in the bush. Our ops staff, Again, we have a whole team of operations staff in every program who are doing all of our operations work for us, taking all the bookings, doing all the customer liaison, doing all the liaison with the regulating authorities. This is our ops manager, Antonio, in Madagascar. And these guys, again, are the glue that holds us all together and keeps the operation going. We have teams of ground ops staff who are doing all the loading, they do all the refueling, they do all the passenger liaison, they do all the weight and balance. And again, this is the team in Madagascar, and we've got about 200 of these guys across all of our operations around the world. One of the big challenges we have as an organisation is many of the national staff that we recruit and we work in our ground ops teams. The level of aviation education they have is really not that great. So we've got a couple of my colleagues, Matt and Roland, who their job is to produce bespoke operations training courses for our national staff. In South Sudan, we've got members of our staff who grew up in refugee camps. Many of them, their education level was primary school education, many of them in refugee camps, some of them just doing primary school under a tree. So for them, they're like sponges. They will suck up as much teaching and education as we can give them. So it's a full-time job, just trying to teach them the basics of flight safety and how you operate safely on an apron, how you wear PPE, all those kind of things. We can't take them for granted. So we invest a lot of money and a lot of time in training up these guys. I'll just go through a couple of quick slides here. We also, because of the nature of the operation that we have, because of the number of different places that we work, we've also got some of our own bespoke in-house software. So any budding software engineers, come and talk to me as well, because we're always looking for developers. So we have a product called Wingman, which is our own flight operations scheduling software, and we use it for a number of different things. For example, fatigue management for our flight crews, scheduling of all the flights that we do across the world, and all of them talk to each other. So even in our head office here in the UK, I can go on and I can see what's booked onto what flight, when, where, and who's taking it, where they're going, and so on. We also have offline functionality, so the pilots can take their iPad, the EFB, into the aeroplane. They can check in passengers, they can take payments, they can do weight and balance calculations, which is this functionality here. They can do their takeoff and landing data. We've also got all of our airstrip charts, which are produced with all the measurements, the takeoff and landing data, the TORA, the TODA, the landing distance, and so on and so forth, for every single airstrip that we fly into. I mentioned earlier on that one of the challenges we have is flying in some of the remote parts of the world where we fly. How do we know where our aeroplanes are? So we use a product called V2 Track, which was developed by a couple of ex-MAF pilots who are now based in New Zealand, and it's a very clever bit of kit. That it's a box that's about that big, it plugs into the dashboard of the aeroplane, and it either communicates through the local cell phone network or through the satellite phone network, and we can track our aeroplanes within 6 seconds of where they are live. So I can just pull out my cell phone and I can just track any of our aeroplanes at any time, anywhere in the world. So I've just shown you this one. This is our fleet of some of our aircraft flying in PNG, and down in the bottom left-hand corner, if you can just see it, that's Northern Australia in Arnhem Land, where we've got some of our GA8s flying. And then you can zoom in and you can see exactly where they are at any one time. And it means that we can know where they are. This is East Africa. We've overlaid all of the airstrip. This isn't even all of them. This is some of the airstrips that we fly to. And the system enables us to do free text messaging, so we can communicate with the pilots backwards and forwards, and they can send us for every takeoff. They have to tell us when they've taken off, every 30 minutes in flight, when they're about to land, when they've landed, and before they take off, all their weight and balance data, who they've got on board, their endurance, the routing, and all that kind of thing. So we know exactly where all of our aeroplanes are at any point in the world. And if they don't report within the 30-minute window, there's a 10-minute window after that, then immediately we start triggering procedures to try and find out where they are. Just because if we delay much longer than that, some of the remote places that our guys are working and flying, trying to find them in that kind of environment would be next to impossible. Just a little bit, I've got 10 minutes left. I just wanted to do a little bit to show you some of the kind of things, the kind of work that we do. I've talked about where we operate and how we operate, but the crux of it is the people that we fly for and the people and the kind of work that we do. And I just want to touch on that just a little bit. So we will fly pretty much anywhere and everywhere. I've done a lot of work in East Africa, flying into places like this, into refugee camps. Unbeknown to the rest of the world, two of the biggest refugee camps in the world have been in Kenya, either in Kakuma, which is up in the north, which was all the guys coming down from the South Sudan. I've done many flights there. And this is a refugee camp that was a place called Wajir, which is out in the eastern part of Kenya, where a lot of the refugees from the fighting in Somalia had come across the border and living for years and years and years in tents like this. So we wouldn't take the tents in because those would all go in by truck, but we would be taking the workers going out there, taking food, medicines, vaccines, all those kind of things in, particularly things like vaccines, which have got a very short life because they have to stay cold. You don't want to take them by road. So we would be flying them in. Medical evacuations, we do a lot of these. Sadly, this is a couple of people that I flew in South Sudan. The little girl with the bandages on her head had fallen into a cooking fire and had burns all down her back and on her legs. And the little girl with the purple dress had an obstruction in her stomach, so we had to fly them out to a local hospital to help get them the surgery that they needed. And I would say we do Medevacs every single day of the year. And I was talking to our ops director in PNG a couple of weeks ago, and the only day that they didn't have a medical evacuation was Christmas Day. So Christmas Eve, New Year's Day, Boxing Day, all the way through, they were doing they have somebody on call who's doing medical evacuations, whether it's complications in birth, snake bites, tribal fights. I mean, I've taken people with gunshot wounds and you name it, and often they are they're unplanned. So they're what we call Good Samaritan flights. So you turn up and you land at an airstrip, and suddenly someone comes up to you, or one of the team comes up to you and says, please, can you take this person? So all of our pilots are medevac trained. They're not medics, but they know the basics of how to put someone to a stretcher and so on and so forth. And that's a real lifesaver for many of the people that we fly. And some of the most heartbreaking stories, actually. This is just some examples of some of the things I've flown over the years. Pretty much you name it, and I have flown it, including live animals. I've flown boxes of day-old chicks and trees and all sorts of things. I've flown in the back of airplanes. That's the beauty of things like the Caravan. You can take all the seats out and you can just fill it full of sort of 1.5 tons of freight, and pretty much anything and everything I've taken in an aeroplane, including these two. So I was called up by one of our ops managers and said, we've got 2 dead bodies for you to bring back. I was thinking, oh no. And I arrived, and this was a gift, and they are 2 Nile Perch. And I know you always say it was this big, but they really were this long. And they've been given as a gift by one of the local village chiefs to the aid workers that we were flying with, and he couldn't, for good manners, couldn't turn them down, so I had to try and find a way of strapping them down to the bottom of the aeroplane, and they stank. But there you go, you see pretty much anything and everything. So 2 things I'm just going to finish off. I'm going to show you the video in a minute of a flight that I did, but I just want to tell you a very quick story. And for me, this is why I love working for MAF, is because of this kind of work. We have a project in Chad, and for those of you whose Chadian geography is a bit rusty, the capital of Chad is N'Djamena in the south, which is where we've got a flight operation. We've got a Caravan and a 182, and our own AMO and our own AOC. So we've got our own small aviation operation. And up right in the top of Chad is a place called Bardai, right up in the north of the Tibeti Mountains. That for us is a one-day flight. So you can't quite get all the way there and back in one day. So we sort of go up and back down to a place called Fire, which you can see is just there. That's a one-day flight for us. To go from N'Djamena to Bardai, the round trip takes people 3 weeks by car. So it's 7 days in one direction. It takes them a week to recover, to get the car fixed, and to get everything they need done in town, and then 7 days by car back again. As I said, we know we can get there in a day. Now, we partner with a very small charity up there who they've been working there for 20 years. And when they started working there with a tribe called the Tedder tribe, 20 years ago, there was nothing written in the Tedder language. It was completely oral culture. And this couple and a couple of other doctors have been working up there for 20 years, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And this is what it looks like. So this is our aeroplane on the ground. Basically, you land on the desert, and we heavily subsidize the flights. So a round trip would cost us something like $14,000 if we had to fly it, but we charge the charity $4,000 for the round trip. Although that sounds like a lot, we do it 3 or 4 times a year, and they know that, and we're working with them. And the $10,000 difference is made up by donors that we have here in the UK who pay that money for this to work. And the reason I'm going to tell you this story is because of this photo. So this is the gentleman is the regional commissioner. He's the government representative in that part of Chad, and this girl is Amina. She's 16 years old, and she's getting a prize from the commissioner because she's won an essay writing competition. Now, to those of us who've been to school in the UK and wherever, that's not a big deal. But for this tribe, it is. Firstly, they had no written language 20 years ago. Secondly, they are a strongly patriarchal society, and the fact that it's a teenage girl that's winning a prize is a massive thing for them, because the people, this couple that are working there have intentionally taught the mothers and the grandmothers how to read, because they're the people that are at home and they will teach their children literacy. So the fact that she's female and that she's a young girl, what I should show you actually is another photograph of her holding her mobile phone, just to prove to you that teenagers are the same the world over. But I love that photograph and that story, because to me that's the heart of what we do, is that we are able to go and we're able to work in partnership with other organisations to transform the life chances of people like Amina. Otherwise, she would, we've improved her life chances no end. So I'm almost on time. So I'm going to finish off by showing you a video that it's not professionally done. It was me that did it, but it's a video I made of a flight that I did in South Sudan a couple of years ago, where it's the first flight that we did to a particular location, a place called Din Din. So the way we do it is we knew the airstrip was there. Some work had been done on it. On a flight back past Din Din a couple of weeks before, one of our other pilots, Christian, had flown through and had a look at the airstrip from the air. They'd measured it, they'd assessed it, they'd had a look at what it was like, and they felt that it was okay for us to go and have a flight there. So I then did the first flight for this day with one of our charities called Medair that we work with. So you go in with no passengers. It was just some cargo, and I planned to come out empty, because obviously you can't just land, you need to take off as well, and the takeoff distance required is always longer than the landing distance required. But just to give you so this is just an example of a flight that we did, and then I can take some questions.